as themes in my life. So, those are the 5 I'm going to give you. And since we're on the topic, why don't I just get started with number 1? So, the first and probably one of the most important things that I have learned in my 20s is that time heals all wounds, but you're probably gonna need stitches. So, what the hell do you mean by that, Jacob? Let me explain. And I'm gonna explain using an example, actually. So, a couple years ago, I went through my first breakup. It was the only relationship I had ever been in up to that point, if you don't count the week-long love affairs I had with girls in middle school that didn't pan out and gave me excuses to change my relationship status on Facebook and get sympathy from my mom and my aunt and uncle. So this was the first real breakup that I've had. And I dated this girl for over 4 years. So it, needless to say, was painful. It sucked. It was terrible. And at the time, I had just started going to therapy. So I would go every week. I would complain. I would cry. I would try and process everything. I would just be a nightmare of a client for my poor therapist while I was trying to figure out how to get past that relationship and move on. And despite the fact that I would be given incredible advice and different tactics and activities to try out after the session would end over the course of the next week until I saw her again, at first I would never actually go and do any of that stuff. And examples of those things were just stuff like learning how to spend time alone. So going and doing activities by myself. Or what else? Things like not looking at old pictures of her and I. Trying to spend less time thinking about her, essentially, and spending less time in my room because that's just where I would go whenever I felt terribly. And so, yeah, all of the stuff that people tell you to do during a breakup, I wasn't actually doing any of it. I just thought that because I was going to therapy it was enough. And so, in my mind, looking back at it now, each of those activities and mindset shifts or changes that I could have made represented little stitches that, if I had chosen to use them, I could have threaded through this metaphorical wound that I had in my life, right? This deep gash that was a part of me as a result of this relationship not working out. And so, to go back to what I said at the start of this, time heals all wounds, but you're probably gonna need stitches. What I mean when I say that is that, yes, as time passes, the things that once really hurt you or bothered you or maybe kept you from doing things or made you continue to do things that you didn't want to do will start to feel better. Those things won't affect you as much. What I'm saying is that I think that if you really want to not only recover from those wounds more quickly, but also give yourself more hope and motivation for what your life could be like after you fully heal from that wound, you need to take it upon yourself to do the difficult things and the activities that you don't want to, or the mental work that really makes you uncomfortable and whatnot. Basically, you need to learn how to give yourself stitches. And really, I think why I've leaned so heavily into this is because I am kind of a control freak, in the sense that I don't like to just let things wait to work themselves out. I don't like to sit there and just tell myself that, oh, time's going to take care of this. I'm going to wake up a few months from now and I'm just going to feel better about everything. Because yes, that is true. That has generally been my experience, but when I really started to feel like I was getting past that relationship is when I started giving myself stitches, essentially. I started going to the movies by myself. I started spending more time in the living room or going to coffee shops to do work, because I was doing video editing as like a freelancer, so I had a lot of time to spend at home. I started making myself go out with my friends on weekends, even when I just wanted to be alone and sulk in my sorrows and be depressed. You guys know how that goes, I'm sure. And I don't want to come off as too extreme and say, like, from the day that something bad happens to you and you receive some kind of wound or injury, you need to just put your head down and start grinding away and trying to get over it. Because this is really common with a lot of guys, but a lot of people have tendencies to try and distract themselves by staying busy, and as a result of that, they're not actually healing from their wounds in the emotional sense. So I'm kind of proposing more of a happy medium where, yes, you give yourself time to feel badly about things and have your time and space to reflect on the relationship that ended, or the job that you got fired from, or the hobby that turned bad, or the friendship that fell apart, whatever it may be, the family member you lost. For me, that was therapy. For you, maybe it could be something like journaling, or going on walks, or running, or building Lego sets. A lot of my friends actually do that. But giving yourself that time and place to feel badly and just let it out and feel sorry for yourself. But going to the other side of that seesaw or that scale, I guess I'm thinking about the legal scale, and counterbalancing it with things and activities and work that encourages you to get past things. Because truthfully, the best part about starting to do a lot of those things was not the fact that I started to get over the relationship more quickly. It's the fact that it showed me all of the things that I could do and be once I was totally past the breakup and into my next phase of life, if that makes sense. So all of a sudden it went from, oh, I'm going to go to the movies by myself because I just don't want to think about her, or I don't want to be at home in my room, and start spiraling to, I want to go to the movies by myself because I just like being alone now, and I'm more comfortable doing it, and I look forward to that time where I just get to enjoy doing something else because I like it. It becomes less about the situation and more about yourself. So, I hope that all made sense. I know that's a pretty common teaching said, I do want to get to the second thing on this list. So, that second thing is, let me intro that a little better. That was terrible. The second lesson that I think I have learned and experienced time and time again in my 20s is that, okay, so I took a quick cut because I just spent the last 10 minutes trying to explain this second thing, and I was doing such an unbelievably shitty job of explaining myself that I seriously considered throwing myself through my window, or at the very least against my wall. But I took a second, and I actually came up with an even better idea, which is just to redo it. So, that's the beauty of being the editor, is that you get to do things like this when you really fuck up. So, here comes my redemption. The second and easily most important lesson that I have learned in my 20s so far is that there is no professor in the world like experience. And the reason why this has resonated with me so much is purely because I am a terrible overthinker. My greatest skill, which my therapist agrees with, is my ability to internalize everything that happens to me. Whether it's one of my friends making a passive-aggressive comment, or the fact that I was too shy to make eye contact with the waiter when I was taking my order, or the fact that this jackass that lives next to me keeps parking his car in front of the garage, so when I try to get out, I literally can't, and I'm afraid to confront him, and so I spend a lot of time thinking about what kind of a person I am, because I don't have the balls to tell somebody to move their car. I think you kind of get my gist here. So, I really hate when I go online and I watch videos about self-help or advice or mental health, whatever, and the people who make those videos just say general shit and vague stuff that isn't really backed up by any stories or examples. So I wanted to come up with good examples for every one of the things that I was going to talk about today, and the example that I came up with for this lesson is my trip to London that I took by myself this past summer. So, for a bit of context, when I was about 11 or 12, I started going on YouTube, and some of the first videos that I saw were videos of guys playing FIFA, the soccer video game, and you probably already know who I'm talking about, but it was the Sidemen, which is this group of British YouTubers who, now they do a bunch of different shit, but at the time they were playing FIFA, just video games. And from the moment I saw their videos, I was beyond obsessed with British culture. I loved their accents, I loved the ways they dressed, I loved the food they ate. I thought London was the coolest city in the world. I thought it was so sick that they all went to football matches together. Just everything about it was so fascinating to me. And so, as a 12-year-old who had only recently become sentient, I decided that one of my biggest goals in life was to go to London. So fast forward to this past summer, I had just left my full-time job, and I had some money saved up. And so I thought to myself, well, Jacob, you have the time and the money right now. You've always said you want to go to London. I think this is the time, so why don't you do it? And in the decade that I had spent thinking about London and my trip there, I had obviously romanticized the absolute shit out of it. I had come up with 1,000 different versions of how my trip would be, but there were a few things that all of soil. I was the most uncomfortable and terrified that I have ever been in my entire life. I was just scared shitless because I had never been out of the country. I had never even been alone for more than a couple days up until that point, and now I was going to be there by myself for a week. And guys, I know that people have done much worse, much scarier, much more intense things, but this was that thing for me. So, last part of the story, and then I'll connect this back. I remember I called an Uber because I didn't understand how to use the tube, the underground railway. It's kind of like the subway if you're from the U.S. And the app that I downloaded that was supposed to tell me where to get on and off wasn't working. So I called an Uber because I just wanted to get to the Airbnb so I could be somewhere safe and quiet. And my driver picked me up, and he spent the next hour and a half trying to convert me to Islam. And I'm not saying anything about the religion itself. It was more about the fact that I was sitting in the back of this guy's car, knowing he was in complete control of my life and well-being, while he was forcing me to look up YouTube videos of popular Islamic teachings and professors, and forcing me to turn my phone around and prove to him that I had looked up the videos and clicked on the right ones, and then making me watch them with him, and then making me show him that I had added them to a playlist that I had to create. So really what I'm getting at here is that from the second I got there, the experience was not what I expected it to be. So maybe this is more of a lesson about expectations, but if you take a step back past that, really what this was to me was a perfect example of the fact that the way you imagine things is never going to be the way that they work out. And the only way to get more comfortable with that is by going and doing more things and having more experiences. Because if you are an overthinker like me, then you probably do have a tendency to idealize situations in your head and romanticize them. And if you're also like me, that has probably led to a lot of disappointment and frustration. And on this trip, this experience in particular, I remember calling my mom that first night, which I had to wait a few hours to do because she was 8 hours behind me because we live on the west coast of the U.S. And I told her, like, Mom, I fucked up. I shouldn't have done this. This is not at all what I expected it to be. I sold myself a dream. I should never have let myself get this excited about this. I don't even know how to use the tube. I don't know where to go to eat. I don't know how to talk to any of these people. Blah, blah, blah. I just felt so lost and dejected because it wasn't going how I thought it would. And it's funny because by the time I left, there was actually a part of me that didn't want to leave, because the longer I spent there and stayed in that experience, mostly because I had no choice, the more comfortable I got with the fact that things were not going to go exactly as I expected them to, but that didn't necessarily mean they were going to be bad. There's just no way for you to learn about yourself and who you are, as well as who you aren't, other than by going and doing those things. And I actually just talked about this in a different video, but experience is just a great way of holding up a mirror to yourself and showing you who you are, because it puts you in situations that you could never have thought of in your head, and that no amount of self-help videos or nice playlists and podcasts, etc., etc. You know what I'm talking about. But I have always been the person who did those things. I for the past 2.5 years have been obsessed with self-help books because I've thought to myself that if I read enough of them, I will figure out exactly how I'm supposed to live my life. But not a single one of those books could have taught me as much about myself and the kind of person that I not only was at the time, but that I wanted to be, as well as that trip itself. So really what I'm saying is get out of your head and get into the world. Because, actually I'm not telling you to do anything because I don't think I have the right to. This is just my experience, but that's what I frequently have to remind myself of because I still have a bad habit of taking everything internal and forgetting the fact that if I just went and did some of these things that scare me or intimidate me or even that excite me, because London was exciting to me when I thought about it, I would find out about myself a lot sooner. Just find out about who I was. So that is the second lesson wrapped up, which means that I deserve a water break now because I got through it without fucking up. I've got 3 more, but I just saw the one of the bars on my battery display go down by 1, which means I'm running out of time, so I'm gonna start picking it up. So make sure you are, if you're still here, paying attention because I'm about to pick up the pace here. So the third thing that I have learned in these past couple of years is a lesson that actually only very recently clicked with me, and it actually happened during a therapy session, my last session like 2 weeks ago. And, well, what is it? I gotta say it. The man who tries to change everything never builds anything. So, the inspiration behind this is the idea that I have always been of the opinion that everything about me could be better. My mindset, my attitude, my career choices, the ways I interact with people, the workouts I do at the gym, the types of books I read, the types of videos I make, the way I sleep in my bed at night, the way I do my skincare, the way I tie my shoes. For the longest time, I've just thought that everything about me could be better, and I know that comes from a different place, and I'm not going into that part of it, but I've always used that as motivation to improve myself by thinking that I could do anything to make myself better, and truthfully, it has been very productive for me. I think it's allowed me to become a better person in many areas, but really, what I'm starting to realize the problem with that mindset has been is that if I'm always trying to change something, when am I ever going to actually have a foundation to build on? If I never think that I am ambitious in the right ways, or that I am motivated by the right things, or that I am actually a creative person, or that I'm funny, or that I'm caring, and that I could be better at all of those things, I'm never going to actually be able to have any certainty about some parts of myself and start working upwards. And I came up with an analogy for this before my example, which is just that if it's kind of like renovating a house, if you're always trying to fix something like redoing the kitchen countertops or installing new lights or doing landscaping or moving things around in the bedrooms or knocking down walls, I'm never going to live in the house. If I'm always fixing the fucking house, I'm never going to sleep in it, and I'm never going to have experiences in it and add new furniture and paintings and art and do all the things that make it feel like a home, that make me feel like I'm proud to live there. So that's kind of the point I'm making. I just have a fixation on trying to get better in every category, and I know that's a good thing. I know it, and I'm thoughts and get them out there in some ways. I am always on edge and frustrated, and I try to tell myself that I should wait to make videos until I feel like I'm doing it for the right reasons, or until I have a really good idea, or until I'm at a different place in my life. Or honestly, and really above all, until I feel like I'm somebody who has a life worth talking about. And I just feel like if I'm waiting for other things to change before I can lean into a certain part of myself, then I'm just never going to do any of the things that I actually want to be doing, because I'm going to spend all my time obsessing over these different parts of me that I could be using collectively to have a better life. I hope that made sense. I feel like that might have been kind of confusing, but I think you get my point. As much as I would love to expand on that a bit more, I am going to go to number 4 with the limited time I have left. So, the fourth lesson that I also just learned literally 2 days ago is that boundaries are your best friend. Boundaries are your best friend. So, long story short, I got into a massive fight with somebody I am pretty close to a couple of days ago. It was not my girlfriend or my best friend, and those are the only 2 people from my life I think I've talked about, so yeah, just want to clarify that. But without getting into the nitty-gritty, I basically let this person be disrespectful and insulting and condescending towards me for the last 6 months, and it all kind of culminated in this massive argument a couple days ago. And to tell you the truth, part of it is my fault, because if I had stuck to the boundaries that I knew I had but chose not to express the past 6 months, and told this girl that the way she was treating me and talking to me were bothering me, and that I didn't like them, and that I wanted her to stop, which is really what I wanted more than anything, then I think that things would not have had to escalate to this point. And I'm sure you guys can think of plenty of examples in your own life where you encountered relationships or people who crossed your lines and you didn't speak up because you didn't want to have an uncomfortable conversation, or you didn't want to seem stingy or come across as, I don't know, annoying or cold, which those have always been the ways that I've thought. I've always been ridiculously non-confrontational to a fault, and I used to think that being non-confrontational to a fault was a good thing. I thought that I was just taking the high road and being the better person, and that I could learn more from the experience than the other person. But now I'm realizing that to a fault is actually a bad thing, because I was not standing up for myself, and I got hurt because of it, and now I'm in a worse situation with this person than I could have been in if I had just respected myself enough to set those boundaries more verbally and make them very apparent. And the topic of respect and boundaries has always been so boring to me. I've never liked to hear people talk about it, but sometimes it is the boring and cliche things that are the most significant, and I feel like that is kind of dead on here. So, yeah, I'm kind of just looking through my notes here, and one thing I said is that people, and really when I say people, I mean myself, are scared to set boundaries because you know people are going to cross them, and again, you don't want to have to deal with what happens when you cross them. But if you never deal with people who are being disrespectful or just making you feel ways you don't want to feel, not to say that you should never feel badly, that's not my point, but the man who stands for nothing falls for everything is a very popular quote, because I didn't stick up for myself. I didn't necessarily fall, but I signed myself up for a lot more conflict when it might have been uncomfortable at the time, but I could have easily said, listen, I don't like the way that you're handling this situation with me, and I would appreciate it if you at least came at it in a more respectful direction because I want to work things out with you, but I guess I'll give you one more thing. It was one of my close friends' girlfriends. Okay, I'm leaving it at this. Basically, let's call him John. John and I were kind of having disagreements about stuff. We're basically like brothers. I've known him forever, but we have always worked them out, and things have always been fine. But his girlfriend, Sarah, who I got into the fallout with, would always insert herself into the situation and be just kind of really fucking mean and condescending towards me and critical of me because of conflicts I would have with John. And so that's that. But I think it's just because, and maybe a lot of you have this as well, but I'm really fortunate to have a lot of good friendships and family members that I get along well with, and we all kind of have this unspoken connection where we kind of subconsciously know each other's lines, but we agree not to cross them, and it's just this unspoken thing. But unfortunately, as you make your way through life, and as I have made my way through mine, I have found that a lot of people that I have met, I do not have that connection with, and this girl is one of those people. And the last thing I want to say about this is that when you let other people disrespect you and cross your boundaries, in a way you're kind of disrespecting yourself, because it's kind of telling yourself, like, I don't value myself enough or think I'm important enough to defend myself from people who are treating me poorly, really. And so while I was kind of telling myself that I just didn't want to be in conflict and that I would rather avoid arguments, really what I was kind of subconsciously signaling to myself, and I don't want to get all psychological and shit, but I think it's true. What I was kind of unconsciously telling myself is that it was okay for other people to treat me like that. And so, in a weird, fucked up way that I don't care to explore more at this very moment, I think I was kind of accepting lesser treatment because I thought I deserved it for some reason, but that is probably something that I will just add to the therapy agenda and not go further into here. So, yeah, I think that makes sense. The fourth lesson is boundaries are your best friend, because not only will they encourage people to respect you, they will help you identify people who do not respect you. And although it may be uncomfortable and shitty and really suck, help you remove them from your life, or at least get them to know what you will and will not stand for. And as a result of that, you will have a better relationship with yourself, which is actually the last part of this. So, I talked about this in a different video on Patreon, but I handled myself super well in the situation, not to gas myself up, but I am actually happy with how I acted, and it's because I finally stood up for myself, despite the fact that I hadn't done it the previous 6 months. When this whole heated conversation got going, I decided that I was gonna draw my metaphorical line in the sand, and I spoke up when this girl crossed it, and I told her that she didn't have the right to do that, blah blah blah. It was some Real Housewives shit. It was really like a Netflix reality show, but because I finally stuck up for myself, when I woke up yesterday morning, because this happened 2 nights ago, I was legitimately, like, proud of myself, and I felt like, in a way, my of self and my identity had been strengthened because I now had a much better idea of what I was and was not willing to deal with. And not only that, but I also knew that I could actually act upon that and not just think it in theory. And isn't it so ironic that that connects perfectly back to the second thing I talked about? So now, looking ahead, I feel a lot better about my ability to deal with conflict. And it's because I set boundaries. So that is the fourth thing. Now I'm going to get to the last thing, and hopefully I can get through it before my camera dies. But I gotta drink water. Okay. The fifth and final lesson that I have learned in my 20s, in the few years that I have been a 20-something, is that you better learn to be patient or you're gonna lose your fucking mind. That is exactly what I wrote in my notes. If you can't learn how to be patient with at least some things, you are never going to be happy about anything. So what do I mean? Allow me one more time to explain myself. Thank you. As much as I talked about being willing and able to make mistakes and fuck up and put yourself into uncomfortable positions and, in a sense, do this thing that I read about in a business book that is called failing faster. So basically making more mistakes so that you learn quicker and gain more experience and get to where you want to be. I'm so bad with run-on sentences, I'm sorry, let me bring it back. Despite the fact that I spent so much time talking about all of that, there is also something to be said for learning the skill of taking a step back and letting things happen. And this is almost impossible for me to do because, like I mentioned earlier, I am a control freak. I'm trying to remember if I mentioned that in the part that I cut out or not, but I am. I feel like everything is in my control. Like I said, I feel like I can change everything about myself and that I am in complete control of my destiny. So, in my life, whenever somebody has told me to be patient or to just let things work out how they're going to work out, I have physically thrown up in my mouth because I just can't accept that. Okay, my camera's about to die, so we might have to do this last part in the dark, but I'm going to keep going. I think a perfect example of this is videos that I have made on this channel. So, when I first started this channel, as some of you might remember, I guess depending on how long you've been with me here, I posted 2 videos, and the second one kind of blew up. Like, it ended up getting over 100,000 views. It was crazy. I couldn't believe it. I didn't even find out until it was like way into having tens of thousands of views and tens of thousands of views. And I freaked out. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna try and do this. I guess people like what I have to say, or maybe think I have more cool things to say or something, so I'm gonna try this out. And I sat down to record my 3rd video, and I could not do it. I couldn't. I was so in my head about the fact that so many people had watched my last one. I was so consumed with saying everything perfectly and coming off in a certain way and resonating with everybody who watched the video and just having everything be perfect. And I was so obsessed with the idea that maybe this could turn into something more that I completely self-destructed on the couch right next to me while I was trying to record it. And I turned my camera off and I said, I just can't do this. I'm being genuine about, because every part of me is saying, well, you know, Jacob, if you had just forced yourself to make that video or come back the next day and tried it again, maybe you would have ended up figuring it out and you would be in a much different position than you are now. But I think deep down, I do have this feeling that sometimes things just work out a certain way, and no matter what you do to try and control them or change them, you're never going to fix them in the ways that you want to. And I think that this is very common with relationships. I think sometimes you end up in friendships or romantic relationships that just were not. Okay, my camera has officially died, so we're in the dark now. I think a lot of people end up in friendships or relationships where they feel like things are going wrong, and they feel like they had everything figured out and that this was supposed to be the right situation for them, and that it's a reflection upon them that things aren't working out. But in all honesty, it might just not have been your time yet. And oh, the camera's back. I'm going to try it again for a second. Okay, and it's gone. Fuck. To get back to what I was saying. One time I saw this guy on Instagram who was dating one of my friends, and he was actually a real shithead, but he had this caption on one of his posts that went something like, "My time will come. My time will come." And for some reason, that just hit me like a ton of bricks. And I think about it a lot. And I think that there are more situations than I would like to admit where the timing just wasn't right, or I had to figure out more about myself before more could happen. So I have a couple more examples of this, one of them being when I go through periods where I feel kind of depressed or down, and that usually happens like once a month, and it will be a couple days out of the month where I just feel like I'm not myself, and I'm not motivated, I'm not very hopeful about things, and I don't want to be around people. And of course this is something I've learned as I've gone through more of them, but sometimes you just have to wait things out and know that in a couple days or even a couple hours you're going to feel better. And that, I guess, to connect it back to the very first lesson I talked about, time heals all wounds. But I'm not necessarily just talking about negative experiences when I talk about being patient. One last example I came up with for this is reading. Sometimes I finish a book and I'm really eager to find another one, and I kind of rush myself into getting one because I just want to read so badly. And I buy a book that I hate, or I buy an audiobook on Audible that I really don't like, and I'm frustrated because I didn't really wait to let something come up, or to just give a little more space for life to do its thing, which is really what I'm kind of getting at here. I know there's a real tendency, I think especially in Western culture, to fill up all of your time and your mental capacity with activities and ambitions. But you have to leave space for things to work out, in the same ways that sometimes you have to be bored for new ideas to come up. And sometimes you gotta leave space for the universe to come up with good ideas for you. And it's hard for me to admit that because it feels like it's something I can't control, but I think it's very true, especially with creative stuff. So, yeah, that's my fifth and final lesson, and it's the one that I have the hardest time with, and that I am really trying so sick in a good way. I mean that in a good way. And I really appreciate you. And I hope that you enjoyed this video and that maybe you took something away from it. I don't know. But if you do have any thoughts about any of what I said, or any different opinions, perspectives, blah blah blah, please blah 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 them down below, because I want to hear what you have to say. And yeah, let's just have a conversation about whatever. I love talking to you guys. So yeah, thank you again for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day or night or afternoon, wherever you are, and I will see you soon.